Well, good afternoon. I'm Mark Stolnick. I serve as manager of energy services for Lincoln Electric System. And here are the things we're going to cover during our presentation today. First of all, I want to talk about why we're starting a solar trade ally network, what the objectives are for the development of this network. I also want to talk about what's changing beginning January 1st, 2022, and what's not changing. And then I want to spend a little time talking about LES rates. There's a lot of confusion about LES rates, and it's really important as you're sitting down with a customer talking about the economics of solar that you have accurate information. Some of you have participated in a webinar that we held late summer. Some of this will be a refresher, but it's a good opportunity to clarify how our rates are structured, what really gets impacted for a customer on their electric bill when they put solar on. It's really important to understand that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and Jay. They're going to talk about in greater detail application and interconnection process, which isn't really changing, but we've got some subject matter experts here today that are going to allow some good interactive dialogue about each step of the process that a solar project would go through. And then again, a couple of the new elements to the program is the guidelines and acknowledgement form for participating in the Solar Trade Ally Network, as well as a customer buyer's guide and acknowledgement that Jay will cover. So let me start by talking about the objectives. Why is it that we have developed this network, the Solar Trade Ally Network? The first objective is to ensure that information about rates, incentives, and other utility related information is accurate and consistent. We have seen and we have heard from customers that they're getting different messages depending on who they're working with. And that's something that doesn't serve anybody well, doesn't serve you well, doesn't serve the customer well, doesn't serve the utility well. So that's one of our objectives, to make sure that everybody has a full understanding of rates, incentives, and other utility related information. Another benefit of an objective of the network is actually being able to have a list of solar installers who have gone through an orientation like this and have signed off and acknowledged that they understand LES rates and other aspects of the program, and that they acknowledge that they will represent those consistently and accurately to customers. So by going through an orientation and by signing that document, you will be part of that list that will be publicly available on the les.com website. So when customers call and inquire about solar and they say, well, who would you recommend? We don't recommend any particular vendor, but what we can do is say, here's a list of folks that have gone through orientation. You might want to start there, okay? We're not endorsing anyone, but we can say you're a participating vendor, trade ally in the Solar Trade Ally Network. And it's exactly what we do with our energy efficiency trade allies, by the way. We've been doing this for 12 years. We have energy efficiency, HVAC contractors, insulation contractors, lighting. We have a list and we direct folks there. So there is some marketing value for you to be part of that. And as I kind of already alluded to, this not only enhances communication between LES and the trade allies, but there are a lot of stakeholders like the city inspector, like the fire department, like a lot of other folks that are involved in that process. And so by bringing this group together on a periodic basis, if there's challenges and issues from any folks and stakeholders along that line, it's good to identify them so we can have those addressed. So in sum, what's changing starting January 1st and what's not? Let's start with what's changing. So in order for a project to be eligible for the one-time LES capacity payment, the project must be completed by a trade ally who is part of the Solar Trade Ally Network, okay? Right now, there is no requirement whatsoever. That will change January 1st. Now, projects that are already in the queue, those will pay the capacity payment for. Don't worry about that. But beginning January 1st, when you submit an application for interconnection, if you are part of the Solar Trade Ally Network, that will be, if you've gone through orientation and you've signed off and then the customer provides us with the document Jay will talk about, then that will count towards your eligibility for that project to get a capacity payment. Network participation means you have to come to one of these orientations. You're here. The folks online are participating, so that's good. The next step will be signing the acknowledgement form, which we'll get into detail here in a little bit. It's part of your packet. For those of you who are online, we sent out a link to the agenda of today's meeting, and in that PDF, you'll find the acknowledgement form as well as other resources. So submitting that would be step 2 of the process. As I mentioned, we will have a publicly available list sometime in January of everybody who has attended the orientation and signed the acknowledgement form as part of the Solar Trade Ally Network. And then the last is for each project, a customer will need to review a customer buyer's guide checklist and sign off. And we'll get into what that covers, but essentially it is the best practices from LES perspective when considering solar. Okay, so that document will need to come in for each project. The acknowledgement that you would sign as a trade ally, you only need to submit that once a year. Okay, you don't need to submit that multiple times, just once a year. What's not changing? Any customer by state statute can have net metering. And if you choose not to participate as a member of the network, you can still submit projects for net metering. It just will not qualify for a capacity payment incentive. The capacity payment incentive is an LES policy, not state statute. LES decided some years ago that we would provide and recognize value of solar through this capacity payment. So the ability to net meter customers in our service territory is in no way impacted by not choosing to participate in the network. You'll find that the application and interconnection process will remain unchanged, but we're going to get into detail about that today, just so everybody is really clear on how that all works. Okay, 3 to 5 minutes now on rates and how do you adequately represent what rates will do in the future. I'm going to start out with a really basic definition of what an electric rate is. It's a mechanism for utilities to recover fixed and variable cost in a way that's fair and non-discriminatory. And what we often see confusion is fixed and variable. There are certain components of your bill that no matter how much energy you use, will always be a part of your bill to provide you with service. It's primarily for infrastructure. I'm going to get into more detail about that. But at the very basis, that's what a rate is. It's using fixed and variable costs to recover the costs in a fair and non-discriminatory manner. And I want to kind of get a feel from you. What percentage do you believe of the costs we recover are fixed versus variable? Anybody want to hazard a guess what percentage are for fixed? I'm sorry, 20%. Anybody else want to hazard a guess? For fixed, 80%. Okay. Obviously, you think about variable, you're thinking about fuel costs, right? Yeah, but 80% of our costs are actually for the infrastructure required to generate, transmit, and distribute electricity in a safe, reliable manner. But our rate structure historically has been recovering costs in a very unbalanced way. About 6 years ago, only 6% of our fixed costs were being recovered through a fixed charge. Only 6%. Over a period of years, we have moved the fixed costs for distribution system out of the energy rate into a facilities charge. And we've begun the process of moving transmission costs out of the energy rate to the facilities charge. Right now, we're at about 33% of our fixed costs are being captured by a fixed charge. That still means there's quite a bit of fixed costs in the energy rate. The average wholesale energy rate is around, just to give you an idea of what the actual wholesale costs tend to be, average across a year, not hour to hour, because that can fluctuate, is probably in the 2 to 3 cent range. Okay. That's, and if you think about it, when you're generating solar, for the most part, you're reducing the need for the customer to purchase energy. Okay. So there's been a big disconnect, and in the way that we've seen rates portrayed to customers. I want to just kind of visually show you what our fixed costs are about. They're about providing customer support, servicing the account, providing contact center support. It's about CT cabinets and generators and transmission lines and distribution and meters and meter servicing and substations. That is where that 80%, all of that is required to provide that reliable service. And a lot of these things are out of sight, out of mind. And usually what's in the newspaper isn't this stuff. It's fuel, it's wind, it's sun, it's coal, it's natural gas. That's what you read about. But the fixed costs is what's required to provide that reliable energy, that electric energy. The variable costs then are the actual costs of fuel. So if we apply this to a customer bill, this is a particular bill that the customer for that month used 1,220 kilowatt hours. The charge for that was $97.72. That energy charge, that $97.72, a portion of that goes to cover the fuel, all of the fuel costs. There's still a lot of fixed costs in that energy charge, but that energy charge is ultimately about paying that fuel cost. Obviously, a customer charge goes to servicing the customer, right? Including the meters and the customer support, all of that type of thing. And then the facility charge is what is charged to recover costs associated with infrastructure. And it's primarily right now the distribution system, and we're becoming more of the transmission. I'm going to talk about levels here in a moment, because LES is a little different from other utilities in the state in that we have three different levels of facility charge based on usage. And I'll get into that in a moment. But what I want you to understand most importantly is, how do you determine, when you're talking to a customer, the value of solar if you're calculating things correctly? So I pose that question to you. If you're sitting with a customer and you're doing your calculation, would you use the letter A formula to determine what LES's rates are by taking the total energy charges, $123.99, dividing by the number of kilowatt hours used? If you did that, you'd come up with 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Or would you use the formula under letter B, the energy charge component divided by kilowatt hours? Anybody want to hazard a guess? B. But we repeatedly see customers being shown A, where all of the costs are divided by the average monthly use. And that does not fairly, adequately, accurately represent what the customer will save, because they still will have fixed costs, okay? And this is something that we see quite a bit. And so that's one of the things we're hoping that we can alleviate, is when you're calculating the savings being generated by solar or wind or whatever it might be, that you're using the correct methodology. Okay. Now this is 8 cents. That is a summer rate. LES has a seasonal energy rate. So in the summer, which is the months of June through September, currently we're at 8 cents a kilowatt hour. And in the winter months, October through May, our rate is actually about 5.5 cents a kilowatt hour. If you want to seasonally weight the average, you'd use a rate of about 6 cents a kilowatt hour. That's a lot different than 10 cents a kilowatt hour, or 12 cents, or 14 cents, because we've seen those rates presented to customers that you will save, or you are paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour. You are paying 10 cents a kilowatt hour, which is not accurate, okay? And a lot of it has to do with how you calculate that rate. So that is one item of rates. The other, of course, is I want to mention the facility charge. Most utilities across the state, there is one fixed facility charge. And that facility charge will be charged no matter how much energy is used by the customer. LES has 3 different levels dependent on energy use. So it's possible if you were to approach a customer that was using over 1,500 kilowatt hours a month, and because of the solar installation, they would be consuming from LES 800 or 850 kilowatt hours per month, their facility charge would drop by $14 a month. So that's some savings. It's possible that if you had a customer with a level 3 paying $40 a month and they went to a level 1, they would save $22 per month. That's savings that you could reflect, okay? So there is some level of impact on fixed charges because of LES's rate structure, okay? But make sure that you understand before you present that you've got it figured out. And I want to offer up, and I can't offer up enough, we are here to help. Don't be afraid to email or call and say, hey, we're doing a projection for a customer. Is this accurate? We will get back to you as quickly as possible because we know that you have a customer waiting for some information, okay?
Mark, you might reference that the facility charge is evaluated at the end of
Yes.
the year, and that level is set forth for the next year.
What he said, basically. We look at 12 months of history each year, and if a customer, let's say 1 year, their average use was 795 kilowatt hours a month, and they added a hot tub or something, and now they're using 850, they would go up a level, right? I would expect when you put solar, if you're in a level 3, there's a good chance you'll drop. Depending on the size, you could drop a level, maybe 2. You may not impact the level, but it is something to consider because that is savings for the customer. Okay. Let me pause a moment for any specific rate questions that I just covered. We'll get to the end too and we can cover those, but okay. One last thing I'm going to cover before I turn it over to Jennifer. And another thing we see that we've seen is projections of electric rates in the future being at the 3.5%, 4.5%, 5%, 7.5% per year increase. For the past 10 years, LES rates, the whole rate, has been about 1% a year. Bear in mind that a number of those years there's been no rate increase, and there were a couple of years, particularly right around the time of the financial collapse, where we had a pretty healthy rise, right? As natural gas prices were shooting up. We looked at the Energy Information Administration, which is like the primary source of data in terms of projecting where things are heading. And for this region of the country, the 10-year forecast annual increase is around 1.3% for the entire rate. The actual energy rate actually declines by 1.7% during this period. So what is the right rate to use when you're doing projections? You know, 1.5% may be based on what the EIA is providing, anywhere between 1.5% to 2%, which is is the typical rate of inflation. I know that our inflation right now for this year is pretty darn high. The impact on rates is not nearly as dramatic from inflation as it is on a lot of other things. But what I'm afraid I see happening is between the miscalculation of the utility rate and the inflation of the annual increases, the payback periods are probably where you'd love them to be. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. If you're using accurate information, those are typically not the payback periods that we would see on a system. Okay. So all I can do is just emphasize is make sure that when you're putting these calculations together, make sure you have good, accurate information. And we're always happy to provide that with you and answer questions. So that's my portion. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Bangert, who oversees a lot of the day-to-day operations for the net metering program, and she'll go through the application and interconnection process.
Thank you, Mark. So many of you I've never actually met before in person, so this is great to see you in person. I'm going to go over the life cycle of a solar installation or a net metering installation and kind of show all the groups that a project touches, and then just a high level of what each group does. And then each group will come up and represent their portion of it and present what they look for and what they do. So to start off, it's the submittal portion, which that typically comes to me. After the project is submitted, it will go to engineering for review. Then the installer will get some kind of a notification. It's an automated notification that they are clear to go ahead and install. After that is completed, they will contact the city for inspections. And then the meter shop will go ahead and install the bidirectional meter. And then finally, if the project does qualify for a capacity payment, then we will process that at that time. So the portion that I know most of you from is a submittal portion. We do have 2 different ways that a project can be submitted. It can be submitted online, or traditionally what we've done for the most part is via email. Everything is submitted to me or Jay, not just me or Jay. In the first 5 bullets is what we absolutely have to have when a project is submitted. If we don't have these items, we cannot push it forward. We can't approve it. Nothing can happen. This is kind of what takes the longest time as far as the network process or the application portion. So we have to have the application filled out, whether that's online or the paper form. And then the equipment specifications. It's very important that we know what panels you're putting on, the inverters that are being used, and the disconnect. We need to know those things. The OneLine diagram, Garrett will go over that here in a little bit, but the OneLine diagram needs to be more than just a few lines. It needs to be pretty specific in the sense that we need to know where things are being connected at. From the OneLine diagram, then we have asked that an aerial view be provided showing where the panels are at on the roof itself, along with kind of a general location of where the disconnect is at in the meter. That way, when we're going out to do inspections, we know where to look and that everything is set up correctly. As Mark talked about earlier, the one additional piece that will be required at the very beginning is a customer-owned solar buyer's checklist. That is going to be required at the very beginning for submission from every single project. So those 5 bullets have to be submitted right away with the application. Along the way, we will need to collect the agreement for interconnection. That basically states that the customer has agreed to have the bidirectional meter installed. That has to be signed in 2 LES before the meter is installed. And then the last 2 pieces of documents that I will need at some point is the customer signed W-9, and then the proof of purchase, which is an itemized invoice that shows the size of the system. Those two documents are needed for the proof of purchase, or excuse me, for the capacity payment if the system does qualify for it. So after we get everything, we get those 5 bullets, then I get it shipped off over to engineering, and they're going to be looking for things like what does LES's existing facilities look like? Is it okay to interconnect a system at a specific location? They're also going to be looking at those OneLine diagrams in the system specifications to make sure everything works correctly. After that, it's going to be shipped over to the installer, and they're going to go ahead and make sure they have the electrical permit taken out as long as the building permit taken out. Once they're completed, they will contact the city so that the inspectors can come out and do their portion of it. And they'll come up and talk about what they do here in a little bit. Once all the permits have passed, then LES gets notified again that the meter is good to be installed. The bidirectional meter can be installed. And then after everything is all said and done, I am notified again, or our group is notified again, that if a system does qualify for a capacity payment, then we go ahead and we process that at that time. So now each group is going to come up and present their portion of what they do throughout this list here. Garrett?
All right,
So it's just that
I
button.
gotta
there.
push that thing.
Yep. And then,
That pointed at this deal.
I don't know.
I'll
I'm
point it
just-
somewhere. All right, thank you, Jennifer. I'm Garrett Klein, supervisor with distribution design here at LES. I'm not the only supervisor in distribution. A lot of you might know that for load installations, commercial customers, we have quadrant engineers and we have specific engineers assigned that it could be any one of 8, 10 people. For these reviews for net metering, it comes specifically to our department. So there aren't, there's no inconsistency. We're reviewing them all the same, and we've got the same personnel doing it. Our job in the engineering review is to understand and approve what's being connected to our system and how it's being connected. So Jennifer mentioned all those things, the system specifications, the layout of the system. We review that, where the meter is located, the proximity of a disconnect switch. We very seldom have any comments on that. We found that for the most part, excuse me, by the time it gets past Jennifer, those things are correct. So what we do care about beyond that is the AC and DC ratings of the system. Those matter for a lot of reasons. There's a limit, if you didn't know, to how much sort of renewable or non-base supply you can have on a system. We track that at LES and we need to know what that number is. And then of course, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Jennifer mentioned the capacity payments. Those relate to the DC values. And then the AC, what's actually interconnected to the system. The how is really what we get from the OneLine diagram. And this is usually where we have the most comments. We need to know, where the system interconnect is and how it's being done. This is just a sample OneLine. I've got another one here too. In this case, the interconnect is done ahead of the main panel of the house. So we need to know specifically what the connection type in that situation is going to be because there's a tap ahead of any system protection. As the supply from LES comes to this meter, the closest upstream protection often is the fuse on the high side of a transformer. So there could be several neighbors connected to the same transformer. So we need to have some kind of protection, of the system beyond that. So this shows this particular one, a tap box with some connectors. You see the house panel there on the right, and then the photovoltaic system is connected through a fuse disconnect switch. So when we look at it one line like this, we say, okay, you've got some fusing there, that meets our requirement. You've got a disconnect there, that meets our requirement. And then the other documentation will show basically the location of those devices. Another one here, different format, but same process for our review. We need to know what's connected and where it's connected. This configuration is the easiest for us to review insofar as the connection point is on a breaker in the house panel. In that case, we know, that the protection existing is there, main breaker, branch circuit breaker. So there wouldn't be a fuse required in the disconnect switch. But anytime that there's a connection ahead of the house main, that's what we like to know, what's there, what else is connected to it. So I would say that's probably 90% of the comments we have. Would you agree, Jennifer? Okay. And beyond that, there are situations, and these are particularly on acreages or service territory that we have acquired over the years from Norris Public Power District, where we run into meter installations that don't look quite like what we typically would have built from in LES's original service territory. This is just an example of one. And so you can imagine if we see a one-line diagram that comes in and shows simply a connection at the meter, and we don't know something like this is out there, when we get there, that usually invokes a whole bunch more requirements or different work on your part. So we're going to start trying to review those in person in the field, I believe. So we know, but if, as you are working with customers on an installation, if you see something like like this, that's not just a single meter on a house, it's great to include that in the application materials. We can then work, right beyond that to get that upgraded and protected too. That's really the extent of it. An accurate one-line diagram for the interconnection and a summary of all the parts you're planning to install. Jennifer, who is next?
I'm just gonna step up and cover this first slide real quick, because I wrote the presentation, because they're all out inspecting, I just sit around the office and do very. So the three areas we're gonna cover today is the building official part, which you can think about, hey, we're gonna mount this on a roof, wanna make sure the roof ain't gonna collapse, gonna carry the weight, how's it bolted down, those kind of things, and Greg will cover that. Then we'll get into the fire code part, which I'll cover, which is essentially, hey, if we have an incident, what do I need to be able to get up on the roof and take care of that incident? So it does mitigate and we totally destroy the building. And then we'll talk a lot about different accesses and different things, and I'll go into it when I get into my presentation. And of course, the electrical aspect of the installment system will be covered by Ray and what those requirements are. Granted, there's a lot of information that we don't really have time to cover with you guys, but at least we're gonna give you a quick overview.
Unfortunately, that's the.
You can't hear me?
Our Zoom phone.
Oh. You'll get it when we all stand up here then. Okay, but then you're also required to take out a building permit and electrical permit. And I would apply for those at the same time that you're applying and sending your information over to LES. So with that, we'll let Greg cover his part. You wanna run one? No.
Go to, he said that one. Okay, so there's a lot of codes that will address this, and it will send you from one back to another to look at one. For my end of it, the simplest way to tell you on your installations will be if you follow the manufacturer's installation instructions, you could pretty much ignore the code book. So that keeps it simple. The only other thing you're gonna have would be when we come out to do an inspection, generally it's at the end. If at any time you would have questions, sometimes they do aerial views on these, and you're there to do an installation. If you're gonna have an issue, I'm the chief building inspector. I don't have a area, but I have my inspectors. We would much prefer you call than wait till the end and we're there for a final and there's an issue. My number, my cell number, 430-5829, and I could get an inspector out there to meet with you. As far as the installation issues, other than that, would be overspanned rafters. And you will address that with plan review when you're getting your permit. And there you could either take the option of getting engineering or show them how you're gonna add or sister onto the rafters to bring them up to span. Let's see what else I got on here. I don't know if anybody had a question on any of this. This is just the references into the building code. And as far as we go, we're looking for the fire department when we do our inspections for the paths of travel. On here though is
My section.
okay. Did I go backwards? So the only other thing would be is that they're on your list in there is exceptions to the rule, detached structures, carports. You can look through those. Those don't require those paths of travel. I don't have anything else. Any other questions? I thought I gave you a card. No. 430-5829, area code 402. So if there was an obstruction or something like that, please call us. We'd much rather come out and meet with you than get there and say, that doesn't work, let's tear it out. Okay?
All right, so I'm going to cover what the International Fire Code covers. And it's section 1204 out of the International Fire Code. This is taken from the 2018 edition. The language pretty much was the same out of the 2012, and this will go in effect in January of this year. So when we look at the requirements out of the fire code, again, we're looking for access. It's, hey, we want to have the ability that the fire department can get up on the roof and address an issue that's going on with the system, which AK probably means a fire or something related to that. Okay, so with our code, again, has the different sections, which we're going to kind of go through, but it says in accordance with the building code and in accordance with the International Residential Code. Residential code essentially covers 1 and 2 family dwellings. Okay, building code covers everything else. Okay, so as long as we can break those things down. And then one concept for you to try to understand right now when we talk about access is just think about roof design and size. 1 or 2 family dwelling, typically an average size of roof. Okay, all buildings are classified into different groups. Okay, and we're going to talk about some of those groups. And so, and it still comes down to what's the average size of that building and what's the average layout of that roof. So again, 1 and 2 family dwellings pretty much don't have requirements as far as having that same fire department access, simply due to the sheer size and nature that they go on. But other types of structures do, and we're going to talk about those access requirements as we go through this. And of course, and then making sure they're installed according to NFPA 70, which is electrical code, which Ray will cover. Okay, so again, access and pathways is what we're looking for. So with this, and again, it's we want to make sure that the roof is designed to carry the weight of the solar panels and us if we have to get up there and have access. So as part of those calculations will go into your building permit for the installation of it. But that's what we're looking for. And we're also making sure those pathways, we have minimum obstructions. So again, if there's a layout that you're looking at and saying, hey, is this going to work? We're the same way. We just can come out and consult ahead of time and say, this is what works for us. This isn't what works for us. And again, a pitched roof versus a flat roof is completely different than what some of the code layouts are when we're trying to set up these systems. All right, exceptions. Again, like Greg said, within the code, there always seems to be exceptions for a lot of different things. So exceptions were detached, non-inhabitable, group U. Again, you guys, essentially it's those small structures, garages, other things. A fence is considered a U structure, all right? So that are serving R3s, which are typically buildings that house less than 16 people and to include those 1 and 2 family dwellings. So again, it's typically the size of a structure and the type of a roofing system that's on that type of structure, which are typically those 3 to 12 pitch or 6 to 12 pitch or something like that of a general size. Because that's the type of occupancy that gets classified into this group R type of classification. So again, we're going to look for that access and pathways spacing on the roof itself. Again, so as we look at these different titles, so R3 and R4 essentially in our code is essentially the same thing as an R3 because it's still same size of structure, same type of roof, typical layout. So we just throw those up there. But again, 1 and 2 family dwellings get accepted as an exception that we don't have these same access and pathway requirements. Okay. So for R3s, shall comply with all these that we're going to talk about, you know, except again, where I said number 1 there, the International Residential Code doesn't apply to single family and duplexes. And then, or if you have a roof that only has a 2 to 12 pitch, okay. So it's almost a flat roof, but not quite. So then you still don't have, you're exempted from the pathway dimensions that we're going to talk about here. So pathways to the ridge have to be at least 1 on each side of the roof that's at least 36 inches wide. Okay, so typically we're just going to arbitrarily say that solar panels are going to be installed on the south side of the roof. Okay, well, if you live on the north, they're probably going to be on the back side of your house. You still got to have access from the street side, at least 1, 36 inches wide up to it. And on the back side of the house, 36 inches wide up to it. Okay, our pathway up to the top of the ridge so that we can address whatever's going on. Setbacks at the ridge comes down to a percentage. And so if you're occupying 33% or less, you need a minimum of 18 inches on both sides of the ridge. If it's more than 33%, then you need to have 3 foot. So again, when you're laying that out, making sure you understand how much is going on the roof, rough estimation there, calculation. So whether it's going to be 18 inches or 36 inches of the ridge for the full length of that roof that's accessible for us to be able to walk on and maneuver around on that roof in order to address whatever the problem is that's going on. An alternate setback, again, looking at the size of buildings. So we're probably getting out of, you know, the residential type here, but if it's 66% or less in plain view of the roof area, setback is still 18, more than 66 is still 36. But this is for a building now that has an automatic sprinkler system installed. So again, that's a question you have to ask when you have a customer that's saying, hey, we'd like to get PV system installed. You say, what type of building are you? Do you have a sprinkler system? Don't have a sprinkler system? And then apply this section of the code that applies to the type of building that they have. Because you can have some of those buildings that are R3, R4 that have sprinkler systems due to the type of occupancies that are in them. Clear as mud. Okay, so here's a picture of one that was installed at 33rd and Huntington. Now this is an apartment building, which is classified as R2. Again, information you're kind of going like, what? Okay. But so the panels stop somewhere over here by the tree. So they knew that they weren't going to be blocked. So but again, this is on the south side of the structure. The structure's on the north side of the street, but we can get access here. There's nothing on the back side of the building where we can still get access. We can still get access here, you know, so even though it doesn't meet some of the requirements necessarily that we're going to cover a little bit more, we still have all the access we probably need in order to address this. And then there's another exception to codes that allows us to say, hey, this works for us based upon essentially the roof design of an apartment complex like this. But again, that's something that you can ask us ahead of time. We can help lay that out. So when we're talking about emergency escape or rescue opening, so if there's a roof where they have access to the roof they use as part of their emergency escape, again, making sure that the panel layout doesn't block that method of emergency egress from the roof structure itself. Well, so when you're laying out those panels, we need to make sure that we still have that 3-foot path. So I'm coming out of that hatch and then I'm going down to some other landing or an emergency escape ladder or something else, which, you know, we have. We need to make sure that those panels don't overlap that area that's considered their egress path, is what they're trying to say here. All right, so then access to buildings other than those R3, so essentially every other type, so for commercial buildings, anything that's non-residential is what we're looking at here. So they have a different set of rules that apply to those. And again, typically most industrials are going to be more of your flat roof style. So when we talk about those requirements, that's how you want to think about it. So the exception to this is if it's determined by us that the roof configuration is similar to what the R3 is, which is what the apartment is. Again, it's R2. So would that apply? No. Well, but in our opinion, that roof style is the same. And therefore we accepted that when that come in for our final, because we still have all the access we need in order to address the situation of that layout. Okay. So we have that ability to accept it. So again, I'd look at sloped roofs different than flat roofs. So perimeter pathways. So now it's all the way around the edge of the roof. So again, we're really essentially talking about flat roofs. All right. That we need a 6-foot clear path. And the exception again is if it's less than 250 feet across, then you're allowed to reduce that to 4 foot. So for the most part, I mean, we don't have that many buildings that are that big. We do have some, but not that big. So generally, we're looking at a 4-foot perimeter all the way around that roof that we have access, that we can get up to the roof and have the ability to maneuver around the section of the panels that are up there to access what we need to access. Okay. And depending on how much they're putting up there, then we need interior pathways. So essentially we need a break in the panels every 150 feet. So if you have a large structure that's spanning 300 feet, you're going to have a section of panels, 4-foot break, another section of panels. For the most part is what we're looking at. Buildings with rapid shutdowns. So every system that gets installed in Lincoln, as per where you see the NEC up there, requires that emergency shutdown system. So any system installed in Lincoln, regardless of the type of structure, will require it. So then that way the fire department can go and disconnect that level service. We'll disconnect the LES side of the service to try to de-energize the structure before we continue to try putting something out that may be burning. So that'll always be required, and the signs associated with it will always be required then also. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian. Just push that button.
Perfect. Well, great. Nice to see you all. I know a lot of you. A lot of you I don't know. First thing I want to talk about is normally the PVC salesman, whoever's selling the system, they are not usually wiring it. And I hope they're not, because usually they're not licensed. But if they are, I really suggest you get the handbook. We're on the 2017. Article 690 has 8 parts to it. It's very short, very easy to read, and it really saves you from having callbacks. Garrett was talking about a one-line diagram, very important. And they're required on every system. So if you're not the salesman, you don't sell the system, what do you want to do? You want to go look at that one-line diagram. How am I going to install this? Because they approved it with LAS. LAS says, well, we like this layout, it'll work. Jennifer says, or Jay said, I like it, we'll do it. So look at that one-line diagram, very important. Most of the violations I see are because they don't look at that one-line diagram. I go to look at the installation and it happens to be on site. I look at it, it's like, well, you already have a violation because you didn't install it according to your specs, which are very important. Anyway, as you can see up here, there's 8 different sections. And if you get the handbook's gonna show you pictures of where do I put stickers? How do I install this? Does the disconnect go on the load side, the line side? Where am I putting it? I suggest as an electrician, I'm talking to you as electricians because I'm electrical inspector for the city of Lincoln. So most of the time the code talks about 40% capacity inside of a junction box, panel board, gutter. So think about that 40%. That's all you can fill that up to. So most of the time, especially if you have electrical equipment before 1980s, they never had enough space in the panels to start with anyway. So now if you try putting all kinds of things in there for your photovoltaic system, your CTs, if you splice it, additional wire size, breakers, and it's already full. So what do I do? First thing you do is you look at your line diagram. Second thing, you call your inspector in your area. There's 5 of us inspectors, and normally we answer our phone, depends on who's calling, you know. But yes, we will answer your questions and ask questions. The best thing you can do. But you have all the information you really need right in front of you with that OneLine diagram. And them guys are making sure that it's right, okay? So I'm not gonna spend much time on this because I want you to get this NEC 2017 and look at it. We're not adopting the 2020 yet, and I don't know if we will. So I'm moving on. This is a really important part of a solar system that gets just forgotten about. 705.12 especially. How much power can I put back into that electrical system? They have requirements, and we really need to think about them requirements and do not overload that. I had one system this year that I turned it down 4 times because I didn't like the load on it. And it actually started the panel in the house on fire. Luckily, the homeowner was home. And the reason was because of voltage drop, too small a wire, and too big a load. There was too much load going back onto that wire from the PV system and from the power being consumed. So obviously, most of you guys know when a PV system works its best. Well, that happened to be that day that fire started. It was sunny out, it was snow on the ground, and it was cold. So that system was pumping out as much as it could, and it overloaded the breaker in the house, which might have been getting old. Could have had a loose connection. But personally, I think you should look at them diagrams more, and OneLine diagrams, and talk to us. See what we prefer, what LES prefers, and what's going to work for each system, okay? I don't know if there's another slide, there might be, but yeah, a little bit more, but like I say, there's so many different systems, so many different ways you can install them. Definitely call, find out. Just for a rule of thumb, if you are not doing load calculations like you should be, because most of the time our problems are marking. Is everything labeled properly? Besides the fact that it's maybe wired correctly, maybe it isn't. There's no stickers on it. First of all, one of the biggest things is you need to tell LES where's the disconnect at. So the meter's right here, the disconnect's here. I don't care, you still label it. The meter's 2 foot to the north, okay? And then a good time is to think about how big is your KW system? How many amps is it? And how many volts? On a 1 and 2 family dwelling, 600 volts is your maximum system you can put on it. You'd be really surprised how many electricians I ask weekly. You know, how many volts do you think is coming out of that DC system? Most of them will say, I don't know, 12, 24. And when I tell them the average 380 to 480 volts, they're dumbfounded. Because I just use, you know, different situations, but what's your car battery? Does that thing sparkle out when you short it out? Of course it does. So think about what you're doing. And label that. So I go out to look at a system and a conduit's going up the wall and I see the disconnect, but I don't see anything else. Well, is that conduit AC or DC? And it's not marked. Well, you're going to have a violation there and you're going to get a callback because that needs to be identified. But do you have to identify the AC and the DC? I say yes, because I don't know what it is, can't get in the house. So just label it. Photovoltaic system. I think it requires it every 10 feet. So if you don't want to come back and do it because I'm going to require you to, you just as well do it now, all right? So when you do put your stickers on for your voltage and your amperage or your KW, whatever like that, make sure you fill it out. Don't just put the sticker on there, fill it out, because I can't do a load calculation. So if I can't do a calculation, a simple one, because I don't like math, unlike these guys, they like math. So if you can't do a simple calculation, I'm not going to let you put more than a 50 amp breaker inside the house on that panel if that's where you're coming off of for power. Because I can, and I don't want you to burn the place down. You don't even know what your amperage is either. So I'm going to hold you to that number unless you actually write it down on paper and show me. And I have made some of you guys do it, and you do it, and then fine, we can talk about it. But another big thing is stay out of LES's meter socket. Of course, it's not their meter socket, it's their meter. I suggest you use lugs in there, is your best alternative for tapping onto the supply side. If you want to use Article 705, very good idea, but you can do what you want. But my biggest beef is staying out of the meter socket except with the load side or the line side of your PV system. Don't put any current transformers in there. Don't run through that with some wires just because it's easy to get into the panel in the basement. Do it the correct way. Stay out of that meter. Go to your disconnect, mark your disconnect, mark your meter. So what if you're not even going inside to the electrical panel? Go down there and put a sticker on there telling me that. All right. Okay, well, I think that's it. And if you have any questions, definitely call the electrical department. There's 5 of us. All right. Thank you.
All right, everyone. My name is Ryan Wesolowski with the Meter Services Department. Oops. And I am one of 6 meter technicians that are part of the meter services area that are responsible for installing the bidirectional meter at the appropriate time, which is one of the last steps in the process. So LES's standard meter on a residential house is not capable of bidirectional metering. So it will only accumulate kilowatt hours, whether the power is going forward or backwards through the meter, it'll only accumulate. So hence the need in a solar installation to have a bidirectional meter so that we can separately calculate the forward direction and the both directions separately, so that I know there's a buyback credit too on anything that produces back to LES. So when the meter technician gets out there, we're just re-verifying everything is correct. Placards are on there, labeling is present and correct. Again, we're just there re-verifying everything that's probably been verified before on that. And then we perform the meter exchange, which is pretty simple process when we're out there. So it's usually pretty quick when LES comes out to do that. So we've got two documents that we want to remind you to familiarize yourselves with. The one is about a 40-page document that's called the Meter Services Specification Guide. Now this document explains more meter-related requirements relating to the service. And then we also have the service regulations, which is another about 40-page document that explains and provides guidance on anything more service related to LES. So both these documents are conveniently located on LES's website, les.com. And if you want to search meter services for the spec guide or service regulations for that, you would be able to find those PDF documents on there. All right. And so a couple things to highlight in the meter services spec guide. Ray just mentioned this regarding load monitoring equipment. Again, I'll reiterate, just stay out of the meter socket or any sort of meter enclosure, CT cabinet. That we want to keep that free of those sorts of things. And then again, we want to remind everyone about the meter sockets. So on new services, rewires, we do require that 200 amp rating on the meter socket for those services, single phase residential services. And there are a couple exceptions, but those are again noted in that meter services specification guide. And my last slide here is an example of some illustrations that would be included in the meter services specification guide. That would be in there to help you understand, you know, dimensions, placement of different things. So if you haven't had a chance to familiarize yourself with those two things, two documents, I encourage you to do that again on LES's website for that. And again, like many of the other guys have said, if you guys have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the meter shop area, or even Jennifer can point you in the right direction for any of your questions you might have. Okay.
So the very last part that we're going to talk about is the capacity payment and how is that determined? So originally, when the application is submitted, we have a roof layout that shows how many panels there are, what size the system is. So at the very end, we go out and we do another verification of what was actually installed to determine the capacity payment. Many of you have been so kind to send final installation photos, which is great for me because in many different situations, the structure may be too tall. The roof may be at a pitch where I can't count the panels. And I'll be honest, I don't really want to get up on roofs anymore to be counting those. So it's really great to have those either drone footage or whatever the case may be, a final installation. So that's what I do when I go to prepare the customer's capacity payment at the very end after the meter has been installed and we have all the documents collected. So I'll look to see what size is the system and then also the direction of the system itself. Is it south facing? Is it west facing? Are the panels flat? Are they on the east or the north? And we'll talk about what is accepted and what isn't accepted. So on the south side, it's $375 per kWDC and west side is $475. If we have a system that is mixed in multiple different directions, we'll figure out how much is on each side and that's how the capacity payment is determined. What I want to be very clear about is we do not incentivize for east, north, or flat panels. So if you have any questions whatsoever when it comes to capacity payments or you've talk to customers about what that might look like, but maybe a system is, or a lot or a house is kind of setting it a diagonal, let me know so that we can be on the same page when it comes to talking to those customers and communicating that last capacity payment. So I think this is the end of the presentation or the orientation. So I think we can open it up for questions now. Oh, just kidding. Just kidding. I forgot. Jay, yours is really important. Sorry about that.
So I drew the short straw and I get to talk about terms and conditions. In your packet, we have the terms and conditions. I'm not going to go over all of them word for word, but I just do want to highlight a couple of them. So and we've talked about this, but one of the new things that we are requiring when you send in an application is that we do have the customer's best practices checklist signed along with the application. In a lot of these things, Mark, we got these from previous utilities. So a lot of these terms and conditions we kind of gathered from other utilities that kind of have the same program. All equipment and material must be purchased, permanently installed and inspected by the city and LES before capacity payment is provided. And you as network participants are going to be required. This one might be an issue, but I think with what we're doing today, with you guys having a better understanding of our policies. So basically, you as a participant are going to be required to release customers from contractual obligations upon request without penalty anytime prior to our approval of the application for review. And I don't foresee that being an issue since we're having these meetings and you have a better understanding of how we're doing the application process itself. But if you do falsify any information will result in a claim by LES for the return of capacity payment and a loss of you will no longer be a network participant. Along with the terms and conditions, there's some acknowledgements, and Mark has gone over this in his presentation. And so we are suggesting that you represent to customers the LES residential and general service small commercial rates as comprised of the two primary components, the fixed customer and the facility charge and a variable energy charge. Along with that, when you're presenting, any savings in that, there is that opportunity other than energy that facility rate might be a part of that component, that you're facilitating that information to the customer properly. And when Mark talked about the energy information rate adjustment, that you are properly giving that information to the customers. And now on the customer checklist buyer's guide. So that is anytime a customer calls us, what's on this checklist is what we are talking to them about, making sure that their home is energy efficient, making sure that they're doing things prior to making this investment. And then we do kind of give key facts regarding, solar systems, what it can do for their home and the energy savings. So this is that signed form. Everybody has that in their packet, and that does have to be signed by the customer prior when you're submitting the application for us to review. And I think that is it for me.